House Democrats are threatening to subpoena top U.S. Census Bureau officials. They're demanding information on recent moves, which have raised the alarm for census experts and groups, including the American Civil Liberties Union. Democrats want the head of the agency, Stephen Dillingham, and others to answer questions on two major topics: the Trump administration's shortening of the deadline to complete the census count by a month, and the president's memo seeking to prevent undocumented immigrants from counting toward congressional seat revisions. Experts warn these moves could undermine accurate representation in government and shortchange financial resources where they're needed most. They also say Black and Latino communities could be especially impacted. This is not the only case highlighting the Trump administration's attempts to go after immigration policy during the pandemic. A proposal from July is seeking to make asylum tougher to obtain in the U.S. In the same month, the administration reversed a rule after swift backlash that could have made getting an education in America more difficult for college students here on visas. Let's bring in Rebecca Rainey. She's an employment and immigration reporter for Politico. Rebecca, welcome. Let's start with the census. After the Supreme Court rejected the administration's attempts to get a question about citizenship on the census form, the president's now pushing to avoid counting undocumented immigrants. What would that do, and what legal hurdles will that face?
Yes, so precisely as you mentioned, after the Supreme Court rejected the Trump administration's effort to add a question about citizenship on the census last year, the Trump administration said it would begin collecting information on undocumented immigrants via government administrative records. So now, as you mentioned earlier, regarding this delay that the Census Bureau has recently announced, they cited that this July 2020 executive order instructing the Commerce Department to not include undocumented immigrants in the count. Now, they mentioned this effort to collect that information via government documents. However, attorneys are still scratching their head as to what the executive order will do and how undocumented immigrants would actually be excluded. Now, when it comes to the effect of what this could mean, this could change the political representation in the House of Representatives. Some states stand to gain by not including undocumented immigrants, and some stand to lose. For example, California would lose 2 seats as opposed to 1 as it is projected to.
Well, what are some of the other moves that the Trump administration has made with respect to undocumented immigrants during the coronavirus pandemic?
Yeah, so some of the things that you touched on before. So earlier this month, the Department of Homeland Security actually published a rule that would charge a first ever application fee for asylum seekers and substantially raise the cost of applying for naturalization. So in the middle of a pandemic, it is becoming even harder to seek asylum in this country or to even become a legal immigrant. At the end of June, Trump also signed an executive order extending a freeze on green cards and barring most categories of foreign workers through the end of the year, arguing that he was, preserving jobs for American workers. Asylum seekers have also been recently, turned away at the border under recent policies implemented by the administration. And there is a recent rulemaking that the administration is moving forward to create a permanent rule that would bar asylum seekers on the basis of public health grounds.
So when you look at this in totality here, these are restrictions. What is the long-term impact from some of these moves?
When it comes to the census, we're already obviously concerned that because of the pandemic, people are, concerned about opening their door to a census taker. There's already a little bit of a negative effect, when someone representing the government knocks on someone's door, but especially with this current administration and the efforts to exclude undocumented immigrants. If anyone has a, mixed status family, why would they open the door to a government official if they're concerned that it could jeopardize their status or ability to be in the United States? And additionally, asylum seekers who are coming to this country are fleeing persecution in other countries. They may also be fleeing, conditions where they couldn't seek treatment for the virus. And so in effect, this really, it keeps out some people who are really struggling right now. It is a pandemic, and it is a public health crisis. So there are, legitimate reasons to prevent travel into the United States to prevent the spread of the virus. But at the same time, Trump is using the pandemic as reasoning to restrict legal immigration.
Yeah, all of this is happening ahead of course, the general election here. And we know during the 2016 campaign, the president talked often as a candidate about building the wall. There was much talk about cracking down on undocumented people in the United States, really was one of the central tenets. Where do these particular moves fit in with his reelection efforts?
I think at this moment, it has really been, the administration's immigration agenda has really been overshadowed by the response to the pandemic. In this sense, I mean, the Trump administration's promise to complete a border wall, there's only been a few miles, maybe a few hundred miles that have been actually completed. So when it comes to the Trump administration's promises that he made in his 2016 campaign at restricting immigration, such as, his failed effort regarding winding down DACA, or whether it be trying to add a citizenship question to the census, he was unsuccessful in all of these efforts. So, these recent Supreme Court decisions, coupled with this pandemic response and trying to crack down on, some of the people who are the most neediest in this country. If you look at those who have been particularly hurt by the pandemic, these low-wage workers, some of them are undocumented immigrants, and some of them are, foreign workers in this country who live in this country who have felt the most dire effects from this pandemic. So when it comes to the election, I'm not sure that the Trump, re-election campaign will be, promoting its immigration policies at this point because they've seen little success.
All right, Rebecca Rainey for us. Rebecca, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.